Okay, we're on the way here. Hello, everybody. I'm going to hang on a minute here as people are logging in, and I'm starting to see them. There's Melissa Crenshaw, there's Tom Lear, Posey Jackson is with us, Arlene Jurowitz is with us from Maine, Augie Muth is here. Oh, they're all rolling in. This is great. So let's give it just a couple more minutes as everybody gets in place here. I'm going to keep tracking here as people come in. And hi, everybody. This is another historic event here today. This is our second HoloSeminar coming to you from various parts around the world. I am absolutely delighted to have this panel of holographic artists with me today. It is a unique event. So we're going to continue to explore actually, the question, what is a hologram? But today I have 6 artists with me who are going to discuss it from their perspective as holographic artists. But before we get stuck into talking about that, I want to, first of all, I'm going to introduce you to each of them, but I also want to acknowledge some absent friends. I most likely won't remember to include everyone, but there are some key figures who, although they're not still with us on this earth today, are still with us in spirit. And first of all, there's Dan Schweitzer, co-founder of the HoloCenter and pioneering holographic artist. And Margaret Benyon, pioneering holographic artist who opened the doorway for all of us. And Rudy Burkhout, who extraordinary holographic artist and dear friend. Ruben Nunez, alchemist extraordinaire and holographic artist. Stephen Benton, friend of holographic artists and technological wizard engineer who made many techniques accessible to holographic artists. Becky Dean, holographic artist and comrade in those heady days of the 80s in New York. Eve Richer, producer of exhibitions of holograms, who dared to challenge the big museums in the UK to exhibit these new forms of holographic art. Emmett Leith, the pioneering engineer who showed us that all of this was possible. There are many more who should be on this list. We have lost a lot of friends and colleagues over the years since those beginnings in 1962. I don't have the time today to list them all, but they are not forgotten. So going on from there, building on that foundation of many artists who've done incredible work over these years, I also want to acknowledge a few other key figures in the HoloCenter history. I would like to acknowledge Sam Murray and Ikuo Nakamura, who have been important figures supporting, evolving the HoloCenter, and who continue to practice holographic art and expand their portfolios and creative techniques with ever expanding and extraordinary work. I want to also acknowledge and thank Martina Mongrovius, who has steered the HoloCenter through challenging times, developing many new programs, successfully gaining grants through NISCA and NEA to fund some great programs, and injecting an ever positive energy into everything she does. Martina is still working with us, and I value her input and knowledge as we move forward. Thank you, Martina. Finally, I want to thank our board for their support, encouragement, and participation as we move the HoloCenter forward as a team dedicated to the mission of the HoloCenter. But I've left one really important person out who is with us today, and that's Ana Maria Nicholson, who I have the very special privilege of introducing to you all as the co-founder of the Center for the Holographic Arts, the HoloCenter. Ana Maria founded the HoloCenter with Dan Schweitzer in 1999 with funding from the Shearwater Foundation, with the mission to provide artists with access to holographic facilities, to educate about holography, produce exhibitions of holographic art, and to explore research into new techniques for creation in holographic media. The HoloCenter has become a focal point for all of these things. Ana Maria has a long history in holography. In those early days in the 70s with her husband, Peter Nicholson, they pioneered portrait holography with ruby pulse lasers, first in Hawaii and then here in New York. Ana Maria went on to establish a unique holographic portrait studio at the Museum of Holography, where she created portraits of many leading figures of those times. From there, she went on to co-found the Center for the Holographic Arts, the HoloCenter, with Dan Schweitzer. She has exhibited her work widely and continues to participate with the HoloCenter as our board chair. I'm delighted to welcome her here today. Philippe Boissonnet. Joining us from Canada, Philippe is an artist working in holography and other creative media since the beginning of the 80s. He was born in France and has lived in Canada, Quebec, since 1985. He received the Elizabeth Greenshields Foundation Award in Canada in 1983 for his works combining drawing and photocopier images, and also won the Shearwater Foundation Award for Holographic Art in 1998. In 2018, he was selected for the Hologram Foundation Prize. Philippe has been a part of several artists in residency programs, such as the Fringe Research Holographics Lab in Toronto, the Dirección Nacional de Antártico in Argentina in 2007, and the HoloCenter Pulse Laser Lab in 2012. Since '83, his work has been exhibited in a number of group and solo exhibitions in Canada, the US, France, Colombia, Mexico, Australia, Japan, and Europe. He presented an important selection of holographic and installation pieces at the HoloCenter Vault Gallery in 2014. Welcome, Philippe. Betsy Connors. Betsy is an artist and educator working in the Boston, Massachusetts area, who has long been associated with experimentation in video and holography. She received a fellowship in video early in her career from MIT's Center for Advanced Visual Studies and grants from the WGBH New Television Workshop, where she worked with Namjoon Pike and William Wegman. She was inspired by Harriet Kasdan Silver's holography to return to school at MIT under the direction of Stephen Benton. After MIT, she worked in holography at the Polaroid Group for a number of years, earning enough to build her own holography lab, which she found crucial for her experimentation and growth in the field. She returned to the SBI Group at the Media Lab as an instructor of holographic art for over 16 years and curated the MIT Museum's first major exhibition of holograms from the New York Museum Holography Collection. Pearl John. Amongst her many academic achievements, she holds an MA in holography from the Royal College of Art, and she completed her doctorate in art and holography in 2019 at De Montfort University. Pearl has exhibited her artwork widely, most recently at the Aviario City Museum in Portugal and Gallery 286 in London in 2018. She won an A-Space Arts Talent Development Bursary in 2019 to create full-color, three-dimensional family trees, and has spent the last year writing and contributing book chapters for two publications, one on the effective impact of robotic artwork, and the other reflecting on her experience as a practice-based researcher. Pearl has an interest in humanizing technology in her art practice and is also committed to teaching. She has a holography studio in physics and astronomy department at the University of Southampton. Dieter Jung is joining us today from Berlin, where he continues to practice his art. His long history in holography begins in those early days of the 70s when he made his first hologram with holographic engineer John White. This early fascination evolved to working with Jody Burns in New York to create his next series of images. From there, he worked as a research fellow at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies at MIT in Boston in connection with the Spatial Imaging Group. In 1990 to 91, he acted as a member of the founding council of the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne, where he served as a professor for creative holography and light art until 2007. There is much more I could include here today about Dieter's work, but let it suffice to say that Dieter has exhibited holograms widely all over the world and continues to creatively explore the many directions that holography unfolds for him. And finally, Andy Pepper, working with holography, projected light and installations, and he uses these creative tools to investigate the unsupported mark, bareness, and the peripheral view. He has written extensively on the subject of creative holography, focusing on the critical engagement of artists and curators. In the mid-70s at the American Cultural Center, Paris, Andy saw his first laser hologram. In the early 80s, while resident as a Fulbright scholar at the Museum of Holography, he made his first hologram under the direction of Dan Schweitzer and Sam Murray at New York Holographic Labs. He was awarded a doctorate for his practice-based research from the University of Reading, UK, in which his thesis was made up of holographic artifacts. He has acted as an external examiner for key doctorate submissions dealing with creative holography and light. He draws in space. So, okay, I've introduced my panel here, and today we're going to begin by exploring that definition of what is a hologram, but today from a creative perspective. And we had a practice session a week or so ago, and Dieter offers us a very eloquent definition from his perspective. And maybe we could start with you, Dieter. Would you like to join us from Berlin and define from us what you feel holography is all about from a creative perspective?
Well, I guess I will repeat what I said the last time, because I had the experience when I saw the first hologram in this magical garden of the lab from Dan Schweitzer and Sam Murray. I absolutely was blown away. Even I hadn't seen a hologram there and didn't want. So in the Museum of Holography, I saw an integral hologram, a hologram that is made with film and combined with laser technology, like the old stereo viewers, but here it's all in space. So, and that was shocking. Absolutely shocking. I was like paralyzed. I couldn't move anymore. Physically, I couldn't move. And this was a basic experience of my route that I should be taken in the future. It was not easy at the time to find the secret people working in the field of holography. Ruben Nunez was the one. He was like a magician, you know, and from Venezuela, a wonderful glass artist also. And they were all difficult to touch. You know, I remembered that I read that Dürer had to go to Italy in order to study the secret sciences of geometric perspectives. You know, I felt very strange. You know, I couldn't connect, but finally did. And I ended up or started with Sam Murray and Dan Schweitzer. But this kind of basic renaissance, I could say for myself, since I worked as a painter, still do as a filmmaker, and I had studied Film and Television Academy in Berlin. And so it was, the technology was there, my technology, but this was something that I said, well, how does this guy do this? And now I started. And what it did to do, and that's why I want to read, after all my experiences with holography, people got a shock. They were blown away. They were fascinated. They were horrified. It was too monstrous. But there was something they couldn't touch. It was untouchable. You know, it's so. But anyhow, to make it easy, if you look in the mirror, you see a 3D image, a virtual image. But you go away, it's gone. But with this medium, you had it there, but you couldn't touch it. You could keep that image, to freeze the image. You know, it was something to keep a ghost in a film.
You had a very eloquent definition, though, of what you saw as a hologram. Would you be willing to share that with us, as you did last time?
Yes, I will. Holography incorporates infinite aesthetic captivities for communication and a continuum of energy, integrating multicultural, spiritual, and religious patterns of the virtual and material worlds. Holograms stimulate the visual senses and apparently reveal fascinating dimensions of thoughts and emotions, awakening dormant layers in the cortex system. So basically, I had made this experience, this awakening of fascinating dimensions, and it was awakening something in me.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great place.
And I want to go. That's why I'm joining you.
That's a great place for us to start. Ana Maria, would you like to add your thoughts in terms of how you define a hologram?
Well, like Dieter, when I first saw a hologram, I fell in love. It was just so magical. And I saw the first holograms with Lloyd Cross. He had rented the loft underneath us in Prince Street in New York. And he had come to New York to raise some money for one of his whatever. He brought his holograms. And I thought they were so magical. To me, it was like looking at images that were like images in the mind, in dreams, and they were there, right there on our space. So I became a true believer, and as so many of us were at that time. You know, it was like a cult. Holography.
Well, there was. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just think there was an extensive community of holographic artists that evolved at that time.
And we thought that holography was going to change the world. You know, we really believed in the power and the of the medium at that time.
Thank you. Betsy, would you like to add? Your microphone is off, by the way.
Well, you know, my first experience, again, I was a video artist at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies with a studio right down the hall from Harriet's. So she always had something on view at the center. But, you know, I think that in terms of my first experience, but it was always very difficult, again, explaining what a hologram was, you know, to my students. So you know, we end up as holographers always explaining what a hologram isn't. You know, it's not a projection from R2D2 or a ghost or Tupac, you know, moving across the stage. As a ghost, you know, it's Pepper's ghost, you know, we generally have to look towards. But I'll just get into that a little later. But yeah, my first experience was a lot like Dieter's in that I couldn't believe, you know, and it was an integral hologram that I had seen first, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. And, everything firing off the brain from having worked in video and film and photography was all so different and all so incredible to view for me for the first time as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Andy, would you like to contribute?
Thank you. I mean, firstly, thanks very much for the invitation to be here. I don't get out much. It's been a weird year, isn't it? That first time I saw a hologram at the American Cultural Centre in Paris, I was a student, and it was a tiny laser hologram of glass, I think. And it was next to some video feedback, which might have been Namjoon Pike, although I'm not sure anymore. And I was completely fascinated by both of them because I'd not experienced either of these spatial activities. And I think like most people, I've been completely attracted or connected to it because of that spectacle. And it's always worried me, which we can talk a little bit about later. But I guess for me, a hologram is the result of a process or a methodology or a practice. And it provides, in my case, a platform to release marks from the surface. So I'm really curious about what happens when you do that, if it's a line in space, what is that now? Because it's not anchored to anything, and it changes the way that you engage with it significantly. And I think, connecting back with what Dieter and Ana Maria said, that sense of the spectacle, that sense of the ghost being there, if you solidify that, it raises questions about what sculpture is, about what photography is, about where things are and the spaces around them. And those are really poignant aspects to investigate.
Thank you. Pearl, would you like to add your comments?
Yes, all of the above. Okay. I had the experience of falling in love that Ana Maria talked about, and the being blown away that Dieter talked about. I think I'd seen holograms on television. I saw an integral hologram on David Bowie's Man Who Fell to Earth, and that fascinated me. But when I saw a white light transmission hologram in the flesh, I was bowled over, and it was the start of a relationship that's lasted for almost 40 years. What attracts me to a hologram, its ability to store or appear to store a moment in time, and then to be able to stack up moments in time, either in 3 or 4 dimensions. Yeah, that's what most excites me now about the medium, the marvelous object that a hologram is.
Thank you. And Philippe? Oh, your microphone is off.
Sorry, yes. Yes, on my side also, I discovered this powerful aesthetic dynamic of hologram when I was in Paris at the Museum of Paris. It was in 1980, and I made a dream to do holograms, and I wrote a paper to get a grant, and I don't know what, but finally it was in Toronto that I had a chance to make my first holograms while I was studying my Master of Art here. And it was at the French Research Holographics Laboratory in Toronto in 1984. And now I understand that already at that time I was doing mainly drawings, but I already was searching for how I could give to the viewer a strong feeling of presence and absence and appearing, disappearing, and fleetingness, even through the other media. So in that case, hologram was for me really a discovery, a strong discovery. And that's the way I chose finally from most of the rest of my artistic career to go on with those light-made holograms, light-made images. And this is mainly because it gave me the true feeling that holograms could are really the medium that gave the feeling of uncertainty that of the gaze, the uncertainty of the gaze that we have over the world through our perception. Perception are always fleeting and kind of moving perceptions. So I continue to choose holography since 1984, and that's a real important medium for me, even if I work with other medium and integrate holograms to sculpture or to installations.
Thank you. It's always fascinating to me that we can have so many people based in different places around the world, and yet we are all striving in similar directions and consumed with the magic of this medium. And continuing on from here, holography has been a challenging medium for a lot of artists to get into because of the equipment that is required to do so, and has required us, all of us, to be persistent in facing lots of challenges with this. Could each of you speak a little to what that process was like for you getting into holography, and how you were sustained to continue forward, how you were able to continue to make art in this medium and grow with it? Who would like to start off with that?
Well,
was it Pearl?
when I started with Stan and Sam, I didn't want to make art. I always do art, but what can I put as a hologram? What is floating in the air? You know, it's not a train, a truck, an airplane, but I want to have something natural. And it was a feather that I used. And then I learned more about the construction of that. It was so primitive. It was a sand table, and was balance stabilized on truck pneus. And then the optics were stuck into cut plastic rods. The pinhole was made out of a little metal with a needle, and it worked. It worked. If then in Cologne, the students, you know, they won't only need the best. And so this kind of not having everything makes you very creative and imaginative in order to pursue the goals. And this is something I learned. The same in Taiwan, where I led, in Kaohsiung, at the Kunshan University, and it had to be the best. You couldn't do primitive things. Well, just as an example, in Brazil, we're doing stereo images. We had no stereo camera. We even didn't have two cameras. So we took two matchboxes with pinholes in it. Made this, you know what I mean? The creativity does not only, it's not based on the most luxurious and expensive lab. And many of the artists in holography have really worked hard, you know, to get their things together, besides then getting money to get these little things together. So it was great that there were some organizations like Schulberger Foundation or other art foundations that leave me alone with holography. They didn't want to see anything, you know. But then this kind of learning, doing holograms, and combining and find a kind of a underlined world that you had in you, but you had it in your work, in your paintings, you know. And this was for me the exciting thing, how to come to an artistic concept and to use holography, or introduce it also as a platform in dialogue. with my other works that I'm doing. And I think that was an important part, and I only can recommend that. But
I
it's
think that's,
easy.
sorry, I think that's a very important point, and that you don't need to have all the bells and whistles in terms of equipment in order to make creative work in holography, that many things can be improvised. Would anybody else like to respond? Go ahead, Pearl, your job, it's your turn.
I think it is a problematic medium. You know, I'm thinking of us being in the pandemic, the idea that we're all in the same storm but different boats. You know, some people are in large homes and other people are in one-bedroom apartments and or sharing. Although I started on a sand table myself, I think it's very difficult now for students to get into university or get into college and to have access to equipment. So in some ways it's still a problematic medium, because you do need space to work with it, and you do need equipment. I was very lucky in that I kind of begged and borrowed equipment. I very much benefited from the Royal Photographic Society's holography group, which was worked in the 80s, and I was able to meet Margaret Benyon there. And I guess I had work experiences with different holographers and very much benefited from their generosity. I'm thinking of Mike Medora of Colour Holographics now, and Martin Richardson and Graham Tunnadine, who were people that I sort of learnt about holography from. SPIE has always been terribly important, and or was important when it ran the holography conferences, which are now ISDH, or the International Display Holography Conferences. So networking has always been terribly important, begging and borrowing equipment and learning. And I think you have to sort of learn from in a master apprentice sort of relationship, learning about holography and all the many different aspects. So it's what was most important is a network, and feeling like a community, part of a community of artists working in holography has been a gift. But yeah, I do want to acknowledge it's like being a filmmaker and needing a lot of equipment. Yes, you can make films with Super 8 cameras or holograms on sand tables with borrowed small Heaney lasers or small diode lasers, but you know, there is benefits to working with more sophisticated equipment, and I was very lucky to do a residency at the HoloCenter, and very grateful for Ana Maria's help with that. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to add in there that the HoloCenter still very much has a mission to provide access and education, and workshops, artist in residence programs are a main part of our mission. So
well,
I think that's really,
Ana Maria, you.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the HoloCenter a little bit. And I want to start by saying that the HoloCenter would never have existed except for Posey Jackson, because it was Posey and who got together with, can't think of his name, and they thought the idea of the HoloCenter, of a center of holography. And they proposed the idea to Dan Schweitzer and myself, and that's how the HoloCenter arrived.
Thank
and
you.
So that needs to be in the history books.
That's a very important part, and the Shearwater Foundation has funded so
and
many
then of course
artists.
you know, and of course the Shearwater then was very influential in you know, they just supported us on and off.
I think that's a very important part to create a center, to have a platform where artists can meet, you know, and work together with some specialists.
Well, also the thing is that the HoloCenter had this wonderful equipment. It had the pulse laser, it had the sand table, it had, oh, you know, we were very fortunate to have all of that equipment. And so all the artists could come and use it and learn from it.
Well, the HoloCenter has been a very important part for many artists in terms of gaining access to create art. So would anybody else like to take that question of equipment and access up? Andy,
Yes,
Andy, you go ahead.
There's something about learning how to make holograms from artists, about them using their vocabulary of understanding, which if it comes from a really significantly specialized source, which is where holography sat for the longest time, it's intimidating to people who don't speak that language. And, you know, to name check Sam and Dan again, like Dieter was doing, to be in that studio with the sand table and have them talk you through it in a language that you understood, and it was a language developed through practical experience of them having done it, opens up a whole set of possibilities for you. And I think we've all worked with engineers and scientists before, and there is a different vocabulary in that there's also a very different approach. Both of them are completely, you know, legitimate, and one has no power over the other. But there are different ways of approaching these things. And I think the fact that if you think about the development of the sand table and you think about homemade holography that Fred put together with other people, it made a significant impact on the opportunity for people to have access to those facilities. And there's that sense that if you think back, I mean, we've mentioned Margaret Benyon before, if you think back to the way Margaret Benyon developed from painting into holography and had access to it purely through engineering facilities, how intimidating that would have been. One, for an artist to go into a space like that, and two, for a woman to go into a space like that, which was entirely dominated by males. And for her to be able to engage on all of those levels and produce the work that she did was, I think, really significant. And if you think about generosity, I can't think of people who were as generous as Margaret. I mean, everybody's generous, of course they are, but she would just answer every letter that everybody sent to her from all over the world. Mm-hmm. And I have experiences of that. When I was a fine art student, I wrote a dissertation about holography. And I'd got Margaret Benyon's name, and she was in Australia at the time. And I wrote her a letter to Australia and sent it off. And, you know, one of those blue airmail letters that, you know, don't exist anymore. And about 3 months later, this blue airmail letter arrived, and it must have been 17 pages of handwritten answers to the questions that I'd asked her. And that was when I fell in love with holography, because I thought, it's amazing and it's impressive and it does all of those things that everybody said. But if these people are in it that can be this generous and offer this advice through their experience of artists, yeah, okay, that's a relationship you want to be part of, I think.
I'd like to just add in there too that one of the phenomenal things for me in holography has been the fact that there, from the very beginning, have been equal numbers of women alongside of men in creative holography. And it was a wonderful thing that we all acknowledged, but has not been something that I think has really been in the public eye. But, you know, we're represented here today, and I find that in my classes online when I teach, I'm getting equal, if not more numbers of women than men in this very technological medium. And Betsy.
So I came, like many of you, from being an artist, being a painter, studying painting in Paris. I met filmmakers who said, well, artists today should be using the technology of today to express themselves, as a kind of a belief that they argued all the time. And so I started working in film and video and photography, and you know, like holography, you need a lot of equipment, like Andy was saying. There's a lot between the artist and the finished product. But for film, you need lighting, you need sound, you need to master all of these different technologies. And you also need the support, as all of you were saying, to access to this technology. And I got into holography because I was at Polaroid doing 2020. I was in an artist in residence program doing 20 by 24 inch instant Polaroids, which is a program that you have to acknowledge Edward Land had started with bringing artists in to use the technology that he was developing to see other ways to change that technology. And that went from Land, I believe, to Steve Benton directly. And that was sort of my access to holography. And around the same time, Polaroid was starting an artist in residency program for holographers. Now they were starting with Frank Stella, James Turrell, you know, people that were in that genre of the field. But I think Steve was also aware of working with artists and the importance that artists had in the development of the technology that we use. So that was my first invitation to holography, to, you know, through the door of the scientists and the business and the corporation, the corporate sort of holography venue. And then I went on to MIT, emerged with all of these, many young physicists, but also artists. Steve brought in artists and hackers and physicists into the program. And it was a real mix. And when I went on later to teach at MIT, we had MIT students and students from the art colleges. They had exchange programs. So that valuable sort of exchange back and forth was always present in my sort of getting into holography. But as Andy mentioned, the one thing after one of the holography conferences, Margaret Benyon came back and stayed at my house for a week. And that was on the verge where I was imagining trying to set up my own holography lab. Again, it's just like you're going from MIT with all of the latest equipment to your basement, you know, and I built a sand table, but it was because she had done it. No one around me had done it, but Margaret was there and she was sort of the basic encouragement, you know, along with the sort of, you know, as you all know, Steve's sort of encouragement of artists. You know, there was that atmosphere that I was very, very lucky to be in at that time. But Margaret was the pivotal figure in my sort of going forward and building a lab myself.
I think she was very pivotal for a lot of people. A really powerful figure in holography.
Mm-hmm.
She would never have acknowledged herself as such.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why it worked.
Right.
You didn't think she was doing anything special. I mean, she did, but she wasn't going to shout about it.
Mm. Philippe, would you like to add to this dialogue?
Yeah, on my side, I think that, well, I must acknowledge two different laboratories with which I worked along. As I mentioned already, I started with the French Research Holographics in Toronto. That's why the way I discovered the power of holography. And then it was, I experimented 2 times with 2 different small laboratories in Montreal, who disappeared now, but mainly with Holographic North in Burlington, with the help of John Perry. And I think that at that time I should have started to manage to build my own laboratory, but I never did it. I hadn't this, well, I don't know if a question of courage or interest or time, but I always had a chance parallelly to that, to get some helps from the Canada Art Council or the Quebec Art Council. And maybe in Canada this is more easy than in other countries, and it's true. And that helped me to work with other people like John Perry, or more recently, I had the help by the Hologram Foundation in Paris, and worked with Pascal Gaucher. And also I must acknowledge, of course, the HoloCenter, because I have been twice kind of resident to work with the pulse laser. And it's true that the question of accessibility of the equipment and the lab is very central and problematic. And having his own lab, I admire those people like Betsy, Ana Maria, other people who did that, because they could experiment many different facets, many different possibilities, and choose their own aesthetic, I guess, more easily than I had to do it, or I could do it, even if on my side I was always interested by other media than holography, integrating that. But I must say that because, I guess, of this difficulty, and also because of the art market, which is not an easy field to penetrate as a holographer, I had sometimes the will to abandon holography art production. I tried, but I never could. I always came back, and it's deeply inside me. And finally, to convince me, I guess, I decided to do my PhD. It was I started about 15 years ago, and I finished more or less 8 years ago. It was a long process, but I'm really happy of that. And now I know that, this is my field of creation, art holography. Holography as an art medium is the medium for me.
Well, clearly all of you have been through your challenges in terms of getting access to equipment, but you're all still there. You're all still there creating in one way or another. Could you speak to what it is that's so magical about holography that makes you keep coming back to it and continuing to be your main avenue of expression? Who would like to start that one off? Okay, maybe I should pick one of you. Okay, Pearl, your turn. Your microphone's off.
I'll have a go. Something that Dieter mentioned at the beginning, we've all touched on it, is the emotive impact of the medium, which can be terribly beneficial and can also get in the way. People seeing a hologram for the first time react with wonder, awe, delight. It's a playful, interactive media, which enables, well, it's similar to interactive genres or play art genres. The way that we have to move to see a hologram. So I appreciate it for the inherent properties that it has in terms of the emotional impact. I think that's something that I enjoy working with. Although the more holograms you've seen, the more you are able to see what you're looking at, which takes a bit of practice or a visual sophistication, then your emotional palette can expand beyond that. Wow, what am I looking at? As a medium, it also references the spiritual and working with reflected and transmitted spectral light has connotations of working with mediums such as sort of gold illuminations of manuscripts and icons, and working with stained glass. And I'm a Quaker, and I refer to the divine as inward light. So experiencing and making holograms reflects or mirrors some aspects of my spirituality. And the process of making a hologram is almost a meditative practice, sitting in the dark in a still environment, waiting for equipment to settle so that you can capture the reflected light waves. And I think it's we can cope with movement up to a quarter of a wavelength of light. So it's a process of stillness and waiting. That's the analog version. Digital holograms are very different. But even developing a hologram and seeing a sort of a three-dimensional shape of light floating up off the plate has a very magical quality to it. So the reason I'm still working with holography also, I think it's probably a bit addictive. It probably doesn't work enough times that you get very frustrated, and then there's a huge sense of relief and delight when it actually works. So so yes, it's the emotive impact, the addictive qualities of making a successful hologram in a sea of lack of success, and that it is almost like a meditative spiritual practice in terms of making.
Thank you, Pearl. Andy.
Just following on from Pearl, actually, and something Dita said, I think it's a lot to do with disrupting expectations in both an intentional and a subliminal way. George put in the chat that holography is original creative expression like clay or paint, and if you think of either of those mediums processes, there are ways of using them, and people can generate a pot or they can generate a painting which isn't disrupting anything. It's conforming to a set of things that everybody would expect, and generally demonstrating the cleverness of the technique, which is not art and it's not creative, it's a demonstration, much as those techniques, to master them, are absolutely phenomenal. So that sense of, I think all of the people who work in holography that develop their own ideas disrupt the expectation of what those things should be. So to put it on a comparison, when I was with Dita in Cologne, and he was talking about the most amazing equipment that was available. Cologne, the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne had this incredible digital TV studio, and I think it was the first digital TV studio in Europe that came out of Sony. I mean, it was top of the range, and students were let loose on this thing. And they, the film and television students produced very nice film and television things. Dita had a student who I think his name was Ricardo, who went in there with a screwdriver and poked it in the back of the machines, without anybody seeing, and disrupted the digital technology to produce the most amazing, damaging, phenomenal visual information, which didn't conform to what Sony thought was good television. So there's that sense that you look at all of the work that's been done, and I think in holography, and all of the stuff that really functions because of that. And it also functions when we're talking about access. If you think of all the people, and there are a lot of them in participating today, who have taught in colleges and labs all over the place, they've passed on a sense of enthusiasm because they've got that enthusiasm themselves. It's not about mastering a photonic technique. It's about pushing things until it squeals and then working out what you might want to do with that. And I think any artist that is engaged does that. Whether they deal with it critically is another matter, but I think that's the bedrock that is sometimes subliminal and sometimes absolutely intentional.
Mm. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to say too, agreeing with Andy 100% that, you know, you take an artist and put them in a holography studio and tell them what they can and can't do, what the limitations are of the window and the nature of vibration, you know, isolation. And immediately everyone wants to do landscape holography with lightweight, you know, images with feathers, like Dieter said, and with what Pro was saying. And instead of this small, precious frame, which was one thing that always bothered me, then everyone just kind of blows that out with installations. And then every subject that's been known to art, you know, portraiture, landscape, abstraction, everything has been tested by the holographic artists. And when you move from a 2D to a 3D to a moving image with color, since the history of technology, you know, holography embodies all of those plus perspective, plus space, you know, and now people are dealing with space for the first time and color in space. And I think when Rudy had mentioned about painting with light, and the first time I saw one of his landscapes and saw that incredibly beautiful line of light, which was reflection off sand, that blew me away, and the depth of the image, you know, and where holographers have taken art, you know, large scale abstraction, like Paula Dawson and Sally Weber, and people who do these total like immersive experiences, you know, within the light of the hologram. I mean, it's just amazing what people have done, and what most people outside of our community are not aware of, you know, what we've done, I think. And that's, you know, one downside of it.
Great.
Well, I decided from the beginning, because of the pulse laser, that my subject was going to be the human body, the human face, the human way of expressing emotion and through the body. And that's what I did through my work. And I was very fortunate to have that pulse laser, which is different from other people who had the sand table and they were limited to that. But the fact of being able to take on that wonderful panorama of the human body and the human face was fantastic.
Thank you, Ana Maria. And Philippe, you
Yeah, I wanted to underline what Andy said about holography as a disruptive media. I liked really this qualification. That's what I feel about it. And also maybe on my side, for me, because it's, I think among all special imagery other media, it is that you don't need anything else than your eye-brain system, light, of course, and your body. And so for me, it shows that there is, yes, it's a disruptive media, but in another way, it's something which shows the continuity with what we are as a biological being with our eye and brain. And it shows that in everything, in all kind of situation, we are in relation with the world. We are the source of what we perceive. And that's the way we understand what we see. Holography is strange for this, disruptive maybe, but it shows how we are in connection with the light and the world which is full of light. This is the paradox maybe.
Did you have anything additional to add to that, Dieter?
Well, there are a lot of aspects. Of course, we are talking here about technical light, unnatural light, and the creation of, with the laser light, to create something lighter than air that is hovering in space. You cannot touch it. It disappears when you go away. That's fascinating. And I think that's this ambivalence, you know. The rainbow is fascinating. It's there. The whole world is fascinated by the rainbow. Why? You cannot make it. You could create a small one, but where does it end? Where does it start? So what fascinates us on holography? I think these are these moments where our feelings are triggered. Really, our senses are doing something that we haven't done before. So we have multi-dimensional, we have holographic thinking. So that's what I was saying the last time. It's not the linear thinking that we would like to have, or that we have the perspectives in thinking, even though this seminar is called the perspective holography. We have a holistic holographic view on life, on nature, on the interwoven of the natural and technical life. And this concept of multidimensional thinking is going to help us and to bring ways further. And in holography, why doesn't it become to the art market? I cannot tell you. There is also, sometimes there was a misunderstanding that artists were thinking they are scientists when they can do a hologram, or scientists thought they are artists when they create a hologram. So the difficulty of presenting in galleries holograms is a different story. You know, painting you hang, you bring, you plot it on the wall, flat stuff, and you have no complex and no difficulties to mount the installation. Recently, I have, and that I would like to add, made a lot of innovations in my holographic mobiles, XYZ. Hello. Really were like an extension of what Calder and George Riggy had done. So they were 8 meters in diameter and 7 meters high, and have 50 pieces as small as this 4 centimeters, square centimeters, the largest over square meters. And they are balanced and hovering in the air. So you have a double movement in space. You have the analog movement, and then you have the holographic virtual movement that then they are hit by the light. So it gives a concert of movement and participation possibilities, because you create the images there. In that context, also artists have done some innovations. I had invented a kind of turnable plate holder, because a mobile, you never know where the image shows. It goes through the wind, natural wind. You have to have a multi-exposure situation. And so it is a turn plate holder with magnetic. So this innovation, small innovation, very simply done, gave possibilities to create a totally new application for holography techniques. And the holographic techniques, as you mentioned before, you had a pulsar. This is a wonderful tool. And by the way, I have to tell you, you were one of the first artists I visited in Brookhaven. You gently showed us around and showed me and my friend around for the first large-scale black and white holograms with Peter Nicholson in the Brookhaven laboratories. But the tools and techniques, we have so many techniques in silkscreen, in every field of production, in holography also. Which technique is suitable to which kind of work? Which brush do I need for this kind of painting? Or, you know, so this is another term you have to develop. And I remember the collaboration with Jody Burns on Steve Benton's one-step hologram. It was, many innovations were done, many innovations. And also this, the kind of simple techniques, doesn't mean more complicated and more complex, the better it is in the field of art. You know, it's a simple situation.
You make a good point, Dieter, that holography, as in other media, there are many, many different directions that you can take. And the techniques are just techniques. It's the content and the ideas that take us into so many different areas of creativity. We're now a little after 1 o'clock, and we are starting to get some questions in here from the audience, and I'd like to throw some of these questions to the panel. I'd like also to encourage the audience to put your questions into the Q&A section. I've already got a few in there. There may be a few of you that have put questions into the chat. Would you mind typing your questions into the Q&A so that I can't, it's hard for me to scan through all of it. If we can stay with the Q&A, it would be great. So first, an anonymous attendee has asked, are there other holography centers around the world like the HoloCenter? I can kind of start that one off in that we have had many centers come and go, sadly, over the years. And right now, there are a few new centers that are beginning to open up and offer artist residencies, notably at Southwood Holographics here in the Hudson Valley, and in England, at Giola, Dr. David Radcliffe has been starting another artist in residence program there. Perhaps my panel would like to jump in with other suggestions for other places that you may know of that are offering access to equipment and facilities. I mean, of course, there's always, I should most definitely add that the HoloCenter's program with the pulse laser has been suspended for the past year because of COVID, but we will be reinstating that program probably in the fall as we move forward.
At Ohio State?
Yes, yes. And any other suggestions from anybody else? No, it's been a challenging time because for a period of time, it got very hard to get access to materials because many of the manufacturers stopped making materials, notably Agfa, Kodak, Ilford, Fuji, but that is beginning to change now, and new materials are arriving from different directions, notably photopolymer, and we have Augie Move with us today, who has been working very extensively with dichromate, making incredible holograms, and new silver halide materials from companies like Ultimate Holographics and Color Holographics. So, and Giola makes materials that are available. So that is expanding again, and more facilities are coming on board. And stay in touch with the HoloCenter. Check our website and check the new website for the Virtual Museum of Holography at vmoholo.org, where we're going to be putting a lot more of that information as we build that website. Let me see. What do you think about the next generation potential or not to take over the medium? Who would like to answer that question? Betsy.
Only to say, and that's something Pearl said earlier, is that I think it would be a good time for all of us in some format to put our heads together to see how we can help support or mentor that next generation. Because I think there was a lull when a lot of labs went under, a lot of people stopped working. But I feel like there is new energy out there and people are interested in learning holography. And if we can somehow figure out a way to mentor that, I mean, that was really Steve Benton's literal dying wish, to finish the book, which would give material to the next group of people wanting to learn about holography. And I think if there's something that can come from us as artists, if there's some way we can mentor people in our labs or just figure out a way online or technically to support that idea. I think it's crucial. As Pearl said, the mentor, mentee, reading about holography is one thing, but practicing is a whole other, understanding. I feel one of the only understandings. So just getting to do it, completes the education in some ways and inspires those to go on. Simple sand tables work, simple optics, Edmund's cheap optics, they work. You can do it. So there's some way we can do that, start thinking about it, form a group, whatever we have to do.
Percy Jackson asked a question here. What holographic images by other artists inspired you in your work? It's a good question.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
What holographic images by other artists inspired you in your work?
Oh,
Ana Maria, did you have a comment?
You mean from the holographers? There are quite a few.
I have a long list, but I'm talking too much.
There was Rudy Burkhardt, for instance.
yeah.
Absolutely. And our friend from Venezuela, the Red Lion, he called himself, he was working with. And then the Brazilian guy, Moises Baumstein, he's not known in our world. He passed away years ago. And actually, Harriet, sometimes it's the works that the people did that inspired me, Margaret Benyon also. And sometimes it's their understanding of the medium of holography. What does the holography means? So I'm saying there is a holographic thinking. You cannot think flat and do 3D. It would be nice to have your holographic thinking and understand the medium and that new idea that goes beyond perspective. I think that's the way we have to go, and we are going there. Then we have no choice. And other people will, there is wonderful sand hologram. It's a sand and reflection in a hologram in a hologram.
Ken Dunkley.
Huh?
Ken
Exactly.
Yes.
That was one of the very powerful, inspiring, unique things. I think he only did one good hologram, but this was so basic, incredible. And there are people, scientists, and he did something. It opens up a new space for you, a new mental space, visually space and a mental space. And I think that is my main interest also on the other side in holography, to have this kind of spatial concept going forward to somewhere. The geometric perspective was there. It was a revolution in the world. Now we have this holographic possibilities. And that is our way out and forward to overcome geometric perspective. And by the way, in Asian countries, holography is such a phenomenon and so understandable, because since only over 150 years, they have known geometric perspective, but we were all educated in this concept of geometric perspective. So think holistically, work 3D, and think 3D, holistic.
Thank you. Thank you. Who else would like to be? Andy, your turn.
It's not a specific hologram, but it is that sense of people approaching things in a way that you find surprising. And if you think about the early women in holography, their sense of being engaged with gender politics and aging and the position of women in society is really, really interesting. And if you take an example with Margaret Benyon, when she was in Australia, she did a whole series of works about the indigenous population, which they were political statements using a process that attracted a lot of attention. And then when she moved back to London and had access to other facilities, she, particularly at the Royal College, she was working on that sense of identity, of also, again, gender politics, the use of cross-gender activities, and the way that you represent all of those things. All of that exists in other areas of the visual arts. But I think the fact that some of the people could do it with such intensity and integrity is really, really important. And you think also things about like Harriet Caston Silver, some of those later Pulse works that she did are really hard to look at. They're about that process of aging and that process of microscopic investigation of something that we don't normally look at. And also people like Anne Stevens, who is sort of dismissed and I understand why, because she came from a very particular type of environment. But some of the work that she produced was really key in exploring aspects that were triggered by her, her position as a person in society. So I think, I think I've been inspired by everybody on the panel actually, and half of the people who are part of the audience. It is that sense that there's remarkable stuff out there, and the privilege of being able to see it is just, not everybody gets that chance, and I think we are all really lucky to have been part of something that has allowed that to happen.
Any more comment? Pearl, you might.
I was influenced by Margaret Benyon, but especially by Rudy Burkhout. We used to talk and talk and talk about what holography could do. And at the early days when we were setting up the laboratory, the studio at the museum, and he would come every day and we would talk and talk. And so that was the main thing that influenced me.
Thank you.
I think too.
May I also add, the artist shouldn't be afraid to collaborate with scientists or technicians, because after a while, the scientists learned that they can be influenced quite well and learn quite a lot from the artists, at least as much as the artists can learn from the scientists. And I think this kind of exchange and growing together in a project, in programs, it's a wonderful performance that you can have in your life.
Pearl, you had a comment?
Two artworks came to mind that have inspired me. One of Margaret Benyon's pieces, don't know what it's called, but I saw it in her personal collection, was of hands holding the surface of the holographic plate. One hand behind the plate, the glass was sort of imaged planed on the surface of the hologram. So the hands held the holographic plate from behind and in front of it. And that I found fascinating. Plus one of Geoffrey Robb's pieces called My Great Aunt, which is in Jonathan Ross's collection, Gallery 286, which is a stereogram of an elderly woman drinking a cup of tea. And as you move in front of the hologram, she continues to drink her tea. And it seems to be a seamless movement, which is sort of reflects a very warm relationship between Jeff and his great aunt. And it sort of speaks of many cups of tea and many discussions that they have held with each other. So it's a very warm, emotionally warm hologram.
Thank you.
Many others though, but those two came to mind.
Philippe, you had.
Yes, I could add, of course, there are all the panelists here who influenced me. I discovered holography in 1984, so some of you have already explored holography since a while at that time. I think, I try to remember, but I think that I discovered Dieter for the first time, the work by Dieter for the first time in Montreal, here in a big exhibition of new media called Images du Futur. And it was in 1985 or something like that. And I really liked, I was influenced by the way he was always playing with the space all around the holograms and in between the holograms and the multiple points of view, how the body has no other choice than to move around. Also, I should mention Sally Weber, a great artist for me also. And I could add, of course, Harriet Kasdan-Silver because maybe for this disruptive aspect of all her works when she is using holography and other media too. And I could add two other artists, maybe less known in the holography art world, a Canadian, Michael Snow. He did in 1986 a big installation, something like, I don't remember how many holograms and installation, but it was for the exhibition, the Universal Exhibition, Exposition Universelle in Vancouver in 86, if I remember well. And also a French artist who didn't do very often hologram, but his name is Piotr Kowalski. And the way he used holography related to space, related to the material element around the material was of some influence, maybe also because at that time I was still in France and I had not many chances to discover some other artists from the States, for instance. So yes, there are many people who influenced me.
Betsy, did you still have
There's so many, but I think that ones that really that inspired me early on in the medium and led me to try the medium was certainly Rudy's and Margaret's. Dan Schweitzer's play, you know, the hologram within the hologram of the gallery piece that he did was a very powerful trigger for me as well. And, you know, later when I started working, Setsuko Ishii's works, nature works, installation works were also very strong. And the last I want to say is John Kaufman's. And I remember John giving a talk once at a conference, which says, this is what I want to do. This is how I did it. And this is what, you know, just a very direct, these incredibly beautifully colored rocks, just very simple, very meditative, just striking imagery, solid, you know, three-dimensional.
Well, we still have 6 minutes left, and we have a lot more questions than I can ask all of you, but I want to combine two questions that I see here. One from George Stadnick saying, what do the panelists envision holography becoming? And another one from an anonymous attendee saying, what do you hope is the future of holography? Perhaps you might each try a stab at that as we wind things up here now. So who would like to have a go at that first? Can I? You go ahead, Dieter.
Well, the future is always speculation, and we have seen how the interest that, like Joseph Beuys offered to the medium, you know, he said that's the medium of the future. Even Joseph Beuys, you all know him. And so we know how with the stereolithography, you know, the 3D prints, something new was coming and was simple, cheap, and the whole interest for holography went downhill. No one could make money with holography. And now it's like coming back, but on the other side, it's like a race somehow, you know, technology with technology. Sometimes they're combining. But Andy mentioned Pepper's Ghost. Andy Pepper mentioned Pepper's Ghost. And this kind of digital transmission now of the ghost, you know, from where you are to me, you know, that I think is another future, another event. And I also hope that this Lumi glass could trigger an interest in perceiving holography and producing holography in different ways, to make it a kind of sensation to look at it. But to think about what you're looking at, the future of holography only can survive, it's going to always there somewhere, but it always can survive better materials, access, free access. What I did in Cologne, I invited people from all over the world, free access. And that also is very successful, and support and documentation of it. So this, you know, go forward, and I think you did the right thing here to bridge all the gaps between the holographers, between us, and also to the audience now, a global audience. And I think that might help in so different countries and cultures to stimulate all the technicians to collaborate with artists. Some artists are too shy even to try, and some scientists are too arrogant, and some scientists, and too many scientists are working in the military field. So it's all top secret. So these poor Chinese artists couldn't go there. So there are many things, you know, it could be an open source for holography. And I think the center that you have there in New York is quite a good, solid base to launch other places. Like CAVS was the Center for Advanced Human Studies, was also kind of meeting point, melting point. All the names you have mentioned, they were up there with Otto Pine during his time, and the support of Steve Benton. You know, but when Steve Benton was gone, there was no more holography out of Betsy Connors, who did a great job. And when Otto Pine died, well, I don't know what happens now to ACT and holography in combination with the MIT. Well, we just need support. We need kind of propaganda, and forget it with getting rich with holography. You can't. This was motivation for so many people. So many of us, and we know them all, have been very altruistic. And well, and some people are sharing and supporting this kind of way. New material is the most important thing. The lasers were shrinking to this size, and the new materials you mentioned will be very helpful. The ecological problem should be solved by the new materials, because some labs had been closed because water pollution was too great and they couldn't finance the filters anymore. And there are many details. Just bridge and let people go over the bridge, and we see the rainbow.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else like to add? Betsy, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, you know, one thing that Martina inspired me by a few years ago when she connected holographers with artists who use light. So I think there are now different venues, including public art, that we can seek out, you know, grants and, you know, those programs, especially in the United States. And, you know, for public art and for working with light, you know, I think it was a brilliant move on her on her part to expand our base in some ways. So I think that's one way of thinking about moving into the future. And the other way I think is
just call them light sculptures.
bringing people in, you know, to our labs, or, you know.
Yeah, you're right. Let's do it.
Andy.
I think there's likely to be a hybrid period where holography shifts into a more digital turnkey situation that can be installed in centres for creative activity. And the expertise that exists will feed into that. And I imagine that that will then cause a renewed interest in real holograms rather than synthetic ones. If you look at the way art education is going worldwide, it's been monetarized. You know, universities think they're businesses and they're earning phenomenal amounts of money from their students. And a good way of doing that is to install really quite economical digital front-end machines that will allow them to become games designers and avatar designers. And apparently 35% of the new jobs that are protected for the future don't exist yet. I mean, I don't know how you come to that, but there's that's what universities and art educational systems are looking to, so that they can get as many students through that system, earn as much money, and generate a process. So a hybrid process, which I know Linda's really interested in, that sense of the synthetic or the digital, has a possibility to take some of the best bits of analog holography, sensitize people to the opportunity to it. And then when they come out the other side, all of these people will still be here and be able to go, yeah, we can do it like this. And there will be that moment where institutions will go, yes, we will install an analog holography facility, in the same way that they're starting to reinstall analog print facilities and analog photography facilities. There's a sort of nesting period, and I think we're probably passing into that, hopefully.
I like that. Pearl.
One hologram I was particularly fascinated with, that's relevant to what Andy's saying, was by the Hellenic Institute of Holography, and it was a crowdsourced image of a Syrian temple that had been destroyed. And the hologram was produced by collaging together tourist photographs that were found online, sort of extracted with AI, presumably with some kind of AI or algorithm to gather these photographs and then to produce an image that was a digital hologram. So to create something that had been lost during war. And that fascinated me in terms of use of digital holography. And I agree that digital printing is one way to go. And in practical terms, I haven't even been able to get into my university lab during the pandemic. So, digital writing is the only thing available to me at the moment.
Philippe, would you like to add to that?
At that point, no, I don't think I have. I don't know. I'll leave the other people.
Any more comments? Ana Maria, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm out of it. I don't know.
Well, on this note, we're already past the hour and a half with more questions that we could have addressed, and we could have gone on for a lot longer here. I want to thank my panel. You've all been amazing. It's been incredible to have you with us from all different parts of the world, and my audience too. I would like to remind everybody to please stay in touch with the HoloCenter, to check out our new website for the VMOH, the Virtual Museum of Holography. We will be posting these seminars on the VMOH. That's in the works right now. We're putting up the pages so that you can access them through YouTube. And we're going to be offering all sorts of new things going forward in relation to access for various different types of residencies and different types of holograms. I agree with all of you that I think we're moving forward into a really interesting new future. Analog is still very much with us, and optical holography and the digital systems that are evolving right now are going to open up many different possibilities, but I think they're going to cross-fertilize, and we'll have both happening at the same time. And new materials to record on. The photopolymers coming out right now offer us all sorts of new creative possibilities. So we will be offering more seminars. This is planned to be a monthly event, although I think we'll take a break for August. We're going to be looking at digital holography, and we're going to be looking at the new approaches that are coming through now with light field technology and the new digital holographic displays. And I hope to continue to add more seminars like this, where we talk about content and art and explore all the many different avenues that holography offers. So on that note, I would say thank you to you all and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda.
Thank
Thank you to
And
everybody.
Anne,
It's a pleasure to have you all.
stay
And on
well.
that note, I'm
Well
gonna
done.
close off. So goodbye to everybody.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.